Hi, welcome. Sorry about all the confusion with this lecture. Really glad we can spend this time together. I want to go through the lecture that we discussed, the material we discussed a couple weeks ago on insurance that I didn't have a chance to discuss with the evening section. So this particular talk now, which ought to be about half an hour or so, 30-40 minutes, is going to be the highlights of the lecture. Instead of doing a full hour and 40 minutes, we're going to pull most of the slides that we went through in class. I want to highlight the key elements and share some big insights. So I'm looking forward to discussing it. Hope you can see the screen here. I have in mind that you'll also be following along with your notes that have been posted, so you can see things more clearly in case the screen isn't so clear. So we're going to be doing this together. Today we're talking about insurance and safety nets. And the agenda starts with what's the big problem? Then we're going to be talking about risk broadly, patching, how families patch together their incomes, and also patch together strategies for dealing with risk. It's not just one solution to every problem. It's a lot of solutions together at the same time. What we're going to talk about is how you can create better pieces that patch together to create a more effective integrated solution. We're going to be talking about microinsurance, which is a big part of the solution, together with informal mechanisms, and they're all going to be part of households' portfolios, in the language of portfolios of the poor. Finally, a few last words and some thoughts on innovation. So that's where we're going. We're going to do it in the next half hour. I'm looking forward to this conversation together. The problem. In Portfolios of the Poor, in the chapter on risk, we introduce Faisal. This is a picture of Faisal. And Faisal's an interesting guy. He supports his family on $36 a month, lives in UP in Uttar Pradesh, India, in rural India, north of Delhi. And he makes his living by driving around, bicycling around, straps these pots onto the back of his bicycle. He's an aluminum pot salesman. And during the course of the diaries, he breaks his leg. He broke his leg and he didn't have insurance. It was a huge problem for Faisal and his family. You can see that because he didn't have enough money, he delayed treatment, delayed going to the hospital that could really set the leg and help him heal. In that process, he ended up losing 8 months of wages. The total treatment in the end only cost $250. So for the inability to pull together $250, he ended up losing 8 months of wages and also had to really scramble to put that money together in the end. He borrowed some, he drew down savings, he took an advance against his son's wages, and relatives chipped in as well. His father had to come in and put all this together. And we started to think Faisal's life could have been so much better if he'd had a little bit of insurance that could have helped him put together that relatively small sum, but a large sum for Faisal, put that together in one time at the right moment. So that's Faisal, and that's the beginning of the problem. The bigger articulation of the problem is that we think about financial needs in the West, in the richer countries, and we think about the broad sweep of time from early adulthood, middle age, old age. I'm somewhere here, you're somewhere there. And we think about ups and downs like that. But in truth, there are a lot of ups and downs along the way. There could be illness, there could be times of success. As you get older, you're too old to work. There's a lot of fluctuation alongside the long swings. That's really the big problem. And that's why, in Portfolios of the Poor, we articulate this idea of a triple whammy. Low incomes, living on $1 a day or less, irregular and unpredictable incomes, a lack of appropriate financial tools. And it's really these three elements that come together to create the triple whammy. And it's this irregularity and unpredictability, which is very much a focus today, together with the tools that can give families ways to deal with those ups and downs, those shocks, those crises that can do so much to derail families and keep them from moving forward and sometimes push them into desperate circumstances. simple tools sometimes can be the difference between a major crisis and an event that is a problem but not a major crisis. This is a picture from one of the sites that Daryl Collins spent time in when she was doing her work for the Financial Diaries. This is Cape Town, South Africa, and a fire had swept through this market town. Blew out the market, everything burned, shacks were burned, stores were burned. An example of the kinds of risks that households face on top of the normal ups and downs of economic life. And in the Financial Diaries, during that year in the lives of poor families, fire and loss of property affected 19% of the households in Bangladesh. In India and Bangladesh, 50% in Bangladesh, 42% in India were affected by major illness. And in South Africa, where AIDS is such a major illness, 81% of the households in South Africa ended up having to contribute in a major way to a funeral. So these are ups and downs on top of ups and downs that already exist. When they happen, this is how you can react. You've got a crisis, well, you could sell your assets. But that's really costly because often those assets are productive and they're what you need to earn your income. If you sell those assets, you can deal with the problem today, but it sets you back as you're trying to move forward. You can take on high-interest loans. It can also be a good solution for today, but a less good solution as you go forward. You're then saddled with these high-interest loans. And the same thing about exhausting savings. But all of these strategies are used, even though they're very costly, because they allow you to pull together adequate financing at the right moment. And that's what makes risk so different. The timing is really critical. You can't wait a month. You can't wait 2 months. Or if you do, there are very high costs to it. And so when we talk about these risks, we're talking about unanticipated ups and downs. But given that, I want to provide a caveat, which is that often the anticipated ups and downs, the ones that you expect to happen, can also feel like unexpected risks. Old age, death, some basic levels of income fluctuation. You know they're going to happen, but when you don't have the tools to save up for them, they often can approach and you're still not very well prepared to deal with them. So today we're going to talk about unexpected, unanticipated risks, but a lot of what we're going to talk about also has implications for anticipated ups and downs. In principle, households should be saving for expected fluctuations. They should be building up pensions for old age, building up bequests to give to their kids, and just building some base savings for exigencies that are likely to happen. But in practice, saving can be difficult. That's something we're going to talk about together in the lecture on savings in a couple weeks. But the bottom line is that it's difficult, and so often anticipated shocks are treated with the same tools as unanticipated shocks. Selling assets, taking on high-interest loans, etc. So, when it comes to dealing with vulnerability, we're going to be talking about insurance, but it's not just that. Part of the problem for poor households is, and rich households for that matter too, is that a lot of the risks are fundamentally uninsurable. They're fundamentally uninsurable. If the economy collapses, if there's political unrest like we're seeing in the Middle East now, if there are dislocations like that, you can't insure against those. You have to deal with them with the means you have. And so often it's saving and drawing down savings, borrowing in emergencies that are critical, even when insurance is available. So saving and borrowing in emergencies is really important. And when you're facing lots of risk, it's hard to decide what to actually insure for. And that's key. What insurance can do, what makes it so critical, is that it's especially good at coping with catastrophic losses. And we'll see some examples in agriculture and health of how that works. All of this comes from a number of sources. The second half of the chapter in economics and microfinance, where we talk about saving and insurance, and also portfolios of the poor, where we discuss dealing with risk. And in portfolios of the poor, one of the things we note is that when we look at the incomes of poor households, this is different countries, South Africa, Bangladesh, and India, that in South Africa, regular wages, standard salaries, make up about 40% of all wages, much less, 10-15% in Bangladesh and India. So most households don't have that steady base income on which to draw. If we add in casual work, so regular wages plus casual work, we see much, much more of people's income. And when we add in self-employment, we see that that's where most of the income is coming from. And so base levels of income are coming from fairly uncertain sources. Self-employment, you don't know how your business is going to do. There are ups and downs of demand. It's not like having a regular salary job. That's the sense in portfolios of the poor, where we often say the problem of living on $2 a day or $1 a day is that it's just an average. When you're self-employed, when you're involved in casual work, piecework, other kind of work like that, wage labor, those ups and downs matter a great deal. We see this, and we've discussed this before, we see this when we think about farmers. The problem for farmers is they have some good times where they earn most of their income. This is from India. Their big issue is how you deal with those good times and how you sort of spread that income across other parts of the year. Traders also, they do particularly well before the harvest. How do they cope and spread that income through other parts of the year? That's part of it, but there's also fluctuations from year to year around these peaks and troughs. How do you deal with a particularly bad season, an unusually bad season? How do you deal with a situation where a season goes, is bad one year, bad the next year, etc.? So that's the big issue. I'm searching here for some water. All this talk. But you get the story. So, excuse me. So here we are. We're talking about how to deal with these kinds of problems. Well, it turns out that your family is there, your community is there. That's your first line of defense. Your own resources, your family, your extended family, and your community. But those are imperfect solutions, and that's why ultimately we're going to talk about private sector and public sector interventions. They're imperfect solutions in the sense that they're not always there when you want it. Often when you're having a hard time, your family and community is having a hard time too. It can be unreliable. It can be stressful, shameful to have to go around to family members, ask for help. Even if it's a loan, they may not have it, or they may feel very awkward in parting with the money. So stress takes a lot of time, takes a lot of energy, and often it's not very transparent in terms of what the sort of reciprocal relationships would be. And so it's very tricky. What the public sector does, what the private sector does is, in the best of cases, to provide a reliable service, a rule-bound service, where a lot of these problems are mitigated. They're not completely gone, but they're mitigated, and that's a huge step forward. So, a few words on risk and income. A big thing. There are two ways of dealing with shocks, with crises. One is, beforehand you can anticipate them. You can take steps that are going to reduce their probability or reduce the damage that can be done. This is what we call ex-ante choices. And the second thing is afterwards. You can use coping mechanisms, ex post. So there's ex-ante beforehand, ex post afterward. And one of the things which is striking is ex-ante, we can think about choices, for example, in business. If you're a farmer, what kind of crops do you grow? You can think about a trade-off between risk on one side and profit on the other side. You're going to choose options which are more profitable, but often that means taking on more risk. These things tend to go like this. And what that means is, and this is one way in which the existence of risk and the lack of insurance tools can actually explain poverty or show how poverty persists,